On a quiet morning, with the sun barely peeking over the horizon, I took my usual seat on the porch, coffee in hand, ready to enjoy a peaceful day of solitude. My custom-built tractor sat parked in the garage, my pride and joy, my weekend escape from the mundane grind of life. I never imagined it would be the center of a storm that would shake the entire neighborhood. But that morning, something changed. A phone buzz. A notification. I glanced at my screen, and in an instant, everything shifted. My tractor, my masterpiece, wasn't where it was supposed to be. It had crossed the boundary. And that was only the beginning. Who took it? Why? And what happened when the one thing I thought was safe became a weapon in a battle I never saw coming? Brace yourself, because what happened next would have even the toughest heart racing. This wasn't just theft. This was something far bigger. The man's tractor wasn't just a machine. It was his pride and joy. Built with his own hands, a true labor of love. It represented years of hard work, long weekends spent in his garage, and a touch of ingenuity that turned an ordinary piece of equipment into something extraordinary. His tractor wasn't just for work. It was his sanctuary. On the weekends, when the world seemed too busy and complicated, he would retreat into his backyard, tending to his garden, plowing snow, or even fixing small things around the house. For him, it was more than just a tool. It was his escape. His tractor was a reminder of his journey, his struggles, and the sweat he had poured into creating a life of his own. He could rely on it for everything. Until one day, his peaceful life was shattered by someone who didn't respect his privacy, his work, or his freedom. Karen, the HOA president, had always been a bit overbearing, but this time she crossed the line. For years, she had made life difficult for the neighbors with her constant surveillance and rules that seemed to target anyone who didn't conform to her narrow vision of what the neighborhood should be. But this time, she had a bigger plan. One that would forever change the dynamic of the community. She had noticed the tractor from across the street, eyeing it like a hawk. With a clipboard in hand and a smug smile, she had already decided that the tractor would be the key to her community beautification project. She saw the machine as nothing more than a tool, one that could serve her ambitions. When the man wasn't home, Karen and her volunteers took matters into their own hands. They broke into his garage with a stealth and efficiency that made the man's blood boil when he found out. They cut locks, disabled alarms, and drove off with his tractor, as if it were theirs to take. The betrayal stung even more because it was his own community, a place where he had trusted people, thinking they respected each other's space. Karen's boldness was overwhelming. But what she didn't know was that the tractor wasn't just any machine. It was a masterpiece of modern technology, and that would be her downfall. As Karen drove off, unaware of what was about to unfold, the man relaxed on his porch with a cup of coffee. His peaceful morning quickly turned into something out of a movie. His phone buzzed with an alert. The tractor had crossed the geofence boundary. In that instant, the high-tech locking system on the tractor kicked in. The doors automatically sealed, the engine began to throttle down, and the tractor was locked in place, its owner's security measures working flawlessly. The protagonist watched slightly bemused, as Karen's face turned from confident to panicked. She had no idea how to stop the tractor from immobilizing itself. The tractor, once the symbol of her newfound control, had now become her prison. Trapped in the middle of a muddy retention ditch, Karen screamed in frustration. As she struggled to escape, the Bluetooth speaker began to blare the last song the man had played, banjo music. It was almost too perfect. Karen's public humiliation began in that moment, as neighbors gathered, phones in hand, watching her flail and panic. The tractor, once a tool for community improvement in her eyes, had now become a symbol of her overreach. From the safety of his porch, the protagonist did nothing but watch as the situation played out. He was initially filled with disbelief. How had it come to this? Karen had stolen his tractor, and now she was paying the price. But as he sipped his coffee and watched the chaos unfold, a strange sense of satisfaction mixed with empathy took over. He wasn't just watching his property being used as a pawn in a larger scheme. He was witnessing the unraveling of a person who had become too consumed by her need for control. But what really struck him was the power of the technology. The very thing Karen had stolen had turned against her. The auto-lock system had trapped her, leaving her unable to move forward with her plan. The tractor wasn't just a machine. It was a reminder of the protagonist's careful planning and foresight. It was a wake-up call for Karen. She had underestimated the man, his machine, and the power of accountability. At first, Karen was surrounded by people who supported her. Neighbors who feared her power and others who were swayed by her grand promises of neighborhood beautification. They had followed her blindly, not questioning her actions because they were afraid of the consequences. But as Karen's attempt to seize the tractor unraveled, the cracks in her facade began to show. Neighbors who once cowered under her reign began to speak out. The public spectacle of Karen's meltdown was a turning point for many. The protagonist, while still hurt by the theft, stood firm. He didn't engage in the petty drama. Instead, he became a beacon of calm. His neighbors began to see the situation for what it was, an abuse of power by someone who thought they could manipulate everyone around them for their own gain. The tractor, once a source of division, was now the symbol of defiance. It wasn't just about the tractor anymore. It was about standing up for what was right and not letting fear govern their lives. The community started to change, and Karen's influence began to crumble. The more Karen pushed, the more the community began to divide. Some neighbors still stood by her, blinded by her manipulation and promises. But others, like the protagonist, saw through her lies. They realized that Karen wasn't trying to improve the neighborhood. She was trying to control it. It was clear that her vision for community was nothing more than a power grab. The emotional toll of living under her thumb had been great for everyone, and now it was time to take a stand. The protagonist became the unlikely leader of the resistance. He hadn't planned for this, but his calm demeanor and willingness to stand up for what was right inspired others to do the same. The community began to rally around him, not just because of the tractor, but because they realized they had been living in fear for too long. The lesson here was that even the most ordinary person can become an agent of change when they stand up against corruption and oppression. As much as the protagonist tried to keep his emotions in check, the betrayal stung deeply. His tractor wasn't just a tool, it was an extension of himself. It represented the hard work and perseverance that had built his life. Karen's actions had been more than just theft. They had been a violation of trust, a theft of something sacred. He couldn't believe that someone from his own neighborhood, someone he had trusted, could be so reckless and self-serving. The heartbreak wasn't just over the tractor. It was over the realization that someone who claimed to be looking out for the community had no regard for personal boundaries or property rights. This was a harsh lesson for him, and for everyone who had ever trusted someone in a position of power. The HOA meeting was the climax of the battle. The protagonist had gathered all his evidence, videos, security footage, witness testimonies, and was ready to expose Karen for what she truly was. The tension in the room was palpable. Karen, still clinging to her narrative, tried to twist the truth to fit her agenda. But the protagonist's evidence was undeniable. One by one, he showed how Karen had broken into his garage, how she had stolen his property, and how her actions had caused unnecessary chaos in the community. As the room sat in stunned silence, the protagonist's words hit home. This wasn't just about a stolen tractor. This was about standing up to someone who thought they were above the law. It was about holding people accountable for their actions, no matter how powerful they believed themselves to be. The crowd slowly began to shift, realizing they had been complicit in allowing Karen's tyranny to go unchecked. As Karen's grip on the HOA tightened, the protagonist realized something important. Power doesn't come from titles or positions. It comes from the ability to lead with integrity. The lessons learned were hard-earned, but they were worth it. The first lesson was that unchecked power corrupts, and people who abuse their power often think they are invincible. The second lesson was that communities thrive when everyone respects each other's rights. The third lesson was that standing up for what's right is never easy, but it is always worth it in the end. For the protagonist, this wasn't just a fight for his tractor. It was a fight for the values he believed in. It was a fight to restore balance in his community and remind everyone that integrity, respect, and accountability were non-negotiable. In the end, the protagonist's victory wasn't just about reclaiming his tractor. It was about reclaiming his dignity, his neighborhood, and his peace of mind. The gazebo, once the symbol of Karen's dominance, was now the symbol of the community's triumph. The protagonist had turned a moment of personal loss into a victory not just for himself, but for everyone who had been oppressed by Karen's reign. As the neighborhood celebrated their newfound freedom, the protagonist reflected on everything that had happened. He had learned some tough lessons along the way, but he had also learned that sometimes standing up to the bullies of the world isn't just a right, it's a responsibility. The community was stronger now, and the protagonist was no longer just a man with a tractor. He was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the quietest suburbs, justice would prevail.